Okay, welcome everyone, good morning. And we're going to give two talks about Google APIs today. We'll start with the Maps API talk, and then there will be a Google Plus API talk. Actually, just before we go into the Maps talk, let me remind you that there is a Google Tech Workshop today in the American University, and you can register at noon. There are two parallel tracks. One is tech track, another one is business and content track. And the topics of the tracks is the following: so Google Plus and its API, YouTube API, web security. And for the business track, it's adverts and nonsense and creating killer web content. And you can go to the link at the very bottom of the slides here to Bitly and learn more about the schedule. And if there is something important to say which I missed, Rania? No? Okay. Otherwise, let's talk about Maps API first. And the agenda is the following. So we'll go over some examples of how people are using Google Maps API. We'll look in detail into static Maps API and static Street View Maps API. Then we'll go over Google Maps JavaScript API, just looking at the Hello World example. And I'll mention a few other tools which are related to Maps API, like web services, etc. And we'll try to leave lots of time for questions. Actually, just before I start, so that I can understand the audience, how many people use Google Maps? Okay, that's kind of majority. How many people have heard about Google Maps API? Okay, also majority. And how many people have Google Maps API key? 1, 2, 3, some of them. So the guys who have already developed things using Google Maps API, this may be a bit boring for you because I'm going to go through the very basic things. So totally feel free to walk away at any point, or keep busy with your laptop. Otherwise, for everyone else, I'll try to be slow and very detailed, so hopefully it's useful and not too boring. Okay, well, everyone knows Google Maps. There are lots of features. Sometimes they're hidden somewhere behind. Well, everyone knows satellite images. Some people know you can show weather information there as well. You can have different layers apart from weather, like photo layer, and you can use cross features, cross layers, like getting directions. So the question is, there are lots of cool features which are available in different countries in different manners. What if you want to use your own data, or what if you want to customize a map? So for example, let's look at some cool stuff which is out there already. For instance, Maersk have lots of vessels which are shipping things around the world, and they have their own map which is showing near 200 vessels in different seas all over the place. And you can see they show a single ship. For instance, there is a single ship in the middle of Atlantic, and there is a ship in the middle of Indian Ocean. And then they aggregate the information about ships which are at the same location, so they just show the aggregate number for the ship. And for each of those ships, you can have an info window. So this thing in the middle of the screen, it's called info window. You can get some specific information about the ship coming from the GPS feed, which we will show on the maps. So this is based on Google Maps API, and you can see that lots of things are customizable there. So they used the satellite images, and they changed the content of the info windows, and they changed the presentation of the info windows. So that's live. The data is coming from the GPS signals, and it's shown on the Google Maps. So another example is photos from Instagram. On the top, you see just a random selection of the photos of the recent photos which just appeared, and you can click on any of those and go to the location where it was taken. So it's a merge between Instagram and Google Maps. And you can see they use here different map type of the Google Maps. So it's not a satellite, it's not a road map, it's a terrain representation. But they didn't do any specific customization of the maps otherwise. Another example, which is probably less beautiful but potentially more useful, it's the incident map for London, which is done by London Police, I believe. And it shows aggregated information about incidents which happened over the last 7 years. So you can see in this example that they're using the road map as the type, but they have modified the individual markers so they look really different. It's not the usual location marker. And you can also get aggregated statistics. And what's also important, the functionality which you usually have on Google Maps, it's also all available here, like all the control tools and all the detailed information. So those are built on top of Google Maps using the API, and let's look overall what are the possibilities for you to develop using the Google Maps API. So everything which should be based on the location. If you want to use the Google Maps, you would go for this type of APIs. And they would work on both mobile devices and desktop devices. So the new version of the JavaScript API, the third version, it ensures that you have high performance on the mobile devices as well. And the main mobile devices for which we provide support is Android and iPhone. And for both Android and iPhone, we have a deep integration with the SDKs. Another thing for which you would want to use Maps API is visualization of geospatial data. So you can use your own data which have some geographic information and create, for instance, three-dimensional images using Google Earth API. You can also do lots of stuff with the new Google Earth Builder API. And for smaller amounts of data for visualization purposes, you can use fusion tables. For instance, if you just want to show a map of the countries which you visited, you can create a simple plain CSV file and then input that into the fusion tables and just show it immediately. Instead of chatting, just show the heat map. So apart from visualization of the particular data, you can also customize the existing maps. So just change the feel and look of the maps. That you would do by selecting certain elements on the maps and applying some particular styling to them. So styling is also available within the family of Google Maps API. So let's try a simplest example. We'll use static maps API for something which is super simple to play with. So the way it works is that you need a browser, and if you want, you can try out things immediately if you have the laptop and connection. But I'm just showing a screenshot here. Not sure if you can see it at the very back, but basically you take a certain URL and just paste it into the browser, and that's the image which you're gonna see in return. So what it does, it uses the static map API and sends the HTTP request, and in return you get a static image. So the main purpose of this API is that if you want to just show map as a static image on your website, this is how you would use it, because then you just have your image tag, and inside the image tag you insert this URL, and that would immediately appear on your website. So just as a usual static image. So a bit more in the details. So the screenshot on the previous slide is generated by the following URL, and you would put it into the image tag in your HTML file. So what are the parameters in that URL? Here is the generic structure of the URL. So it's maps.googleapis.com/maps, API static map, question mark, and then you have your parameters. Just before we go into details about each of the parameters which can be there, I should mention that if you want to use HTTPS, then you just specify that in the URL immediately, and then it uses the secure protocol. The one thing to keep in mind that as in all standard URLs, all parameters should be separated with the ampersand, and also we use the standard URL encoding. So what are the parameters there? The required parameters are the center, so that defines the central position of the map. And then it can take either geographical coordinates, latitude and longitude, or it can take a string address. So for example, you can say Beirut, Lebanon, and it will do the geocoding for you. So geocoding is one of the web services which comes together with the Maps API, and it converts the address information into the geographical position. You can also use this geocoding web service if you use other Maps API, not necessarily only the static map. And another web service which we provide is the reverse geocoding. So if you have the geographical coordinates, you can transform them into the address. So back to the parameters which we need in the URL. Another usually required parameter is the zoom level. So that determines how detailed is the map information. So if we just go back to our URL a couple of slides back, so the zoom level here is 12. And you can discover the range by changing that parameter in the URL. The next parameter is the size. So that determines the size of the image which you are going to get in return. Now, at this point, I should mention that there are several flavors of the APIs. There is free API, which everyone can use for non-commercial applications, and then there is business API. So you can get more detailed information about how many requests and what kind of support you get if you use one or another, but also just keep in mind that simple things like the size of the image may also depend on what type of API you are using, because the limits will be different. So next one is the scale parameter, and this is where you can feel the distinction between designing applications for desktop and mobile, because sometimes you can sacrifice the size versus scale. But if you want something to look nice on the mobile devices, you can apply a different scaling factor. And scale also depends, like the range which the scale parameter can take also depends on whether you are using the free API or business API. Now, next parameter here is the format for the output image, and that's one of the three standard image formats which you can use. Now back to the actual map parameters. So map type is it's something which can be road map or satellite view or hybrid or terrain, and they're dependent also on the zoom level which you can choose. Language is an optional parameter to show labels in different languages. Region is the geographical parameter which you may use instead of zoom. And then some detailed information about map's features. So map consists of features. So for example, the roads, streets, they are called features as a set. And you can apply specific styling or specific attributes to all features, only to a selected subset of features. So for example, if you later want to change the color of all rows, you would first select all rows by specifying feature column row. And apart from map feature attributes, you also have map feature elements. So for example, you can select geometry of specific features. So for example, geometry of all rows or labels of all rows, and apply something to them. So feature parameters can be markers. And again, you specify location of the marker by using let long coordinates or by using the address which will be geocoded for you. And you can use multiple markers and apply different styling to them. You can connect the markers. So we are still talking just about the static image API, which you can use with the URL. So you can connect the markers with the path and make the path of the specific color, and it will show you connection of the markers there. And also you can use the visible parameter in order to specify which locations have to be shown on the map, even though you don't put a marker there. And talking about styling, when you change the color of the maps of the roads on the map or streets of the map, then you apply the style parameter. And it's a bit more complex, so I will show you later where to get all the documentation for the styling. And finally, there is an important thing, which is a required sensor parameter that sets the application to know whether it should use the information coming from a user, for example, from some GPS signal, or whether it's turned off. So you always need to specify whether it's true or false. So that was an example of static map image API. And now another static API which we can use is the Street View. And the reason why it's also interesting, because you can use the Street View API not only for the Street View images which Google provides, but you can also use your own panoramas, for instance. All the controls which are available in Street View, they will be available to you as well to use with your own imagery. So how does this Street View image API look like? So it does exactly the same as the static image API. It embeds a static image into your web page, and you don't need to use the JavaScript. Again, you can use HTTP or HTTPS. And again, you generate the image just by specifying some parameters after the question mark in the URL. So the parameters which I used here are pretty much the same. So that's an example of Street View. You just get an image back from the HTTP request. And the URL parameters should be again separated by ampersand and URL encoded. So you have the size of the image, you have location of the image, just in the same way as we had the static map API. But also you have some specific parameters for the Street View. So for example, you can have the heading, which is the compass direction, and you can have field of view, which is relevant, which is related to the Street View camera position, and pitch, so that's the level of inclination of the camera. And you still need to use the sensor to set it to true or false when you use a GPS feed or some coordinates feed or not. Okay, so those were two examples of the static APIs. And now we move to JavaScript API third version. So that's the current version, which is the best tool to use at the moment for both mobile and desktop applications. So it allows you robust and high. It allows you to create robust and high-performing applications on the both. And there are certain tools which you need actually to be aware of or to know. While the static APIs you can use immediately, you can just take the URL and experiment and create the image straight away. For JavaScript API, you preferably would want to know those technologies. The first step, however, if you want to use the JavaScript API, is to get an API key at the API console. It's not obligatory, but it allows you to monitor the performance of your application. So, for example, how many requests you are getting and which exactly services you are using. So that's important for yourself. And so, for example, you can monitor your statistics and make decisions whether for your use cases you want to use the premium Maps API, or you want just to use the free one. So in order to obtain the API key, you would go to console, and I'm not going to describe the steps here, but you can just go to the website and repeat them. And then you can write a hello world example. So what we have here is just a short HTML file, and it starts with doctype HTML, that's the HTML5 declaration. Then in the style you have CSS specifications, which you may need to change if you are writing an application for a mobile phone. Then within the script tag you're actually calling the Map API. That's where you would put your API key, and that's where you would set the sensor parameter to true or false. So many parameters which you see in the static Maps API are also used here, so that's why we went in such detail over those. So then you create a function with the myOption object where you specify all the parameters, and you have the division element in your HTML file, which contains this map object called here map canvas. So just once again, important points here. What we did in the JavaScript example, which you can try out as well. And let's talk about other tools which are available for you within the Google Maps API family. So you can use the Google Earth API. So if you want to embed the Google Earth globe onto your website and just use all the controls which are available on Google Earth, you would use that one. And then there is a family of web services which can be used in connection with the Google Maps API. So I have mentioned already geocoding and reverse geocoding. You can also use directions API. So in the usual way how you are calculating directions on the Google Maps, you can also customize that for your own applications. You can have a separate elevation API, so this service shows you how high are your locations above the sea level. And something super important is the place information. So I'm going to talk a little bit in detail about those. So that's the web services which are there. One which I didn't mention here is the distance metrics API. That's a tool which allows you to calculate distances between the places. So it's similar to directions API, but it's simpler, so it just allows you to calculate the distance along a particular route. Oops, that looks super bad. But essentially it's an example of a web service request which also uses the standard format, a typical URL link, and then parameters. So one of the examples of the web services is the Place API, and it also shows you the advantage of using the Google Maps APIs as in general, because it allows you to use our database of places. So it's like 15 million places, and you can query them using the Places API, and you can get also detailed information about businesses and geographical locations and points of interest. So you would use their specified format and get out XML or JSON objects. In particular, for the places, there are 4 basic type of requests. So you can search for a place given a location. You can also request place details, so that's the information about address, like opening hours and things like that. You can report user check-ins. So this functionality, which is available on Google Maps for mobiles, you can also integrate within your application by using the place check-ins. And you can create, you can use the information about new places or allow users of your APIs to create new places through the place API. So for yeah. And now a few links for you where you can get more information about Google Maps API. So that's the main link. It's at the developers google.com website. In particular, there is a super important part which I didn't walk over, is the licensing. So that's where you can get information about the terms of usage and also detailed information about how to decide which API to choose. Also free API versus business API. So you'll get all the information about the requirements for the number of requests per user per day and like all the technical specs. And you can have lots of examples of how other people are using Maps API at the showcase on the same website. And I don't think it's yet available for all of the examples there, but they're planning to insert quick how-tos. So for each of the examples, you can also copy the snippets of the code and try to play with them. So next steps. Basically try it out, and I will be around today. So if you have a chance to try something out, you can also grab me and ask your questions. But otherwise, you can ask any of the questions now, and probably we'll do a bit of the questions together at the end. Yeah, so I might take like a few questions right now and more when Basel is done with his talk as well. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
So I want to ask about the sensor.
Mm-hmm.
How is the sensor affects the map?
So sensor sets the parameter which tells the application that I need to detect the user location.
Yes.
And for example, you can say that I want to center the map on the user location.
So if I define the center of the map and I set the sensor to the true, it will override the center?
Yes, so for example, you can pipe it into the center parameter.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, one question. Like first, you mentioned if you're using API with like the minimum functionality, it's going to turn into an image, right? So, like, why do you recommend using an API instead of like putting the map as an image inside the HTML page?
So there are several answers to this question. Just for the purposes of introducing people to the API, it's the easiest way probably to play with the parameters. So consider that as your sandbox. If you don't know how something works and you are inclined more to try things out rather than to write code first, you can just change the parameters in the URL and see what happens. Because many of the parameters and many of the parameters are the same in the JavaScript version as well. So that's primarily for like introduction reasons. And sometimes you don't actually need to have the full functionality of the JavaScript API if you just want to show the location of your shop. Also, if you want to have something like super styled, you might just want to have like a beautiful artistic image rather than the actual thing from the vacation, for instance. Yeah.
Imagine that you have for example, a website displaying the places of restaurants, You don't want to save every individual image for every restaurant. So you would save in your database or anywhere the location of the URL of the image, and then it would work without having lots of overhead in your.
Downloading that page would be much easier.
Also,
Yeah.
of course, also loading the page would be much quicker since you will be downloading from many places.
Yeah, and sometimes you want basically to generate the images in advance and just use them as a thumbnail, for instance. Cool. Maybe one important thing which I should mention for everyone is that there is a dedicated Maps API developers team at Google, and you can find them on Google+ if you just search for Maps API. And in particular, they run weekly office hours, so you can join a Hangout on Google+ and just ask their questions there. Should we switch to? Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's switch to Google+ API right now, and we'll take more questions at the end.
My name is Basel Al-Naffouri. I'm a software engineer on Google+ Mobile, and today I want to talk a little bit about Google+ API. Before I start, how many people have used Google+? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Google+ about itself, so people who don't know it can kind of get a basic introduction of it, and then we'll dive into the API. So this is today's agenda. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Google+, and then I'll mention a little overview about the platform and what we're trying to do with Google+ API. And then I'm going to talk about the public data API, what we use to basically access users, query users, and activities within that. And then finally, we're going to go talk about the Hangouts APIs, which have a lot of really cool stuff that you guys can play with. And finally, we'll end up with Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to start writing it so you won't forget, because there's a lot of material. So Google+. Google+ there's a bunch of key concepts that I want to introduce, so that we kind of all are on the same page when we're talking a little bit more moving forward with the API itself. The first concept is, of course, circles. And the idea behind circles is, you don't want to share everything to everybody at the same level. I noticed that when before Google+ was around, my level of sharing has gone down. Other social networks would either force me to share publicly to everybody or share everything to all my friends. And so circles was a great concept for me because I could just share what I want to whoever I want. Besides being a software engineer, I do a lot of improv acting on the side. So improvised acting, I do a lot of really fun, plays and whatnot. So I have a lot of friends who are improvisers, and I have a lot of friends who are software engineers. And a lot of times the material that I would share with my geeky friends about the newest C++ API, or what's coming up with what geek festivals I'm going to, might not be interesting for people who are improvisers, and vice versa. The interesting articles that I send to my improv friends are not necessarily the same ones that I would send to my software engineers. So with circles, I can actually have two different sets of circles for friends who are software engineers versus ones who are actors, and I can actually share things separately to those different sets of people. And the flip side, I can also consume content from the flip side by basically looking at my improv feed versus my software engineering feed. So that having these ability to granularly send, share with people on either an individual all the way up to sending stuff publicly is something that basically allows me to share how I want and what I want. Second thing is Hangouts. How many people have tried Hangouts? Wow, okay. I really highly suggest that you try it out. It's really, really cool. So it's basically a video chat with up to 10 people of your friends. And the quality is super high, and it's really good. And it does a lot of really cool stuff of switching on demand on who's basically speaking, so you can actually get a better view for it. There's a lot of really cool apps that are already there. For example, you can watch YouTube together. So, for example, me and Rania right here could be watching a Hangout and be like, Rania, you got to see this video that I saw recently. It's really cool. So I actually can put up the YouTube video while hanging out with Rania, and we can both talk about it and laugh about it. So it has an ability to kind of connect you with people that you want to connect with in a much more personalized way. Before I joined Google, I actually was at a company where most of my meetings were done over the phone. And I noticed that my level of engagement was going down in those meetings. I would tone out. I would not actually be able to concentrate because I'm checking email at the same time. I'm looking at my phone. I am, checking what's on TV. And when I moved to Google, a lot of our meetings were run over video conference. And I noticed that my level of engagement has gone up a lot because I'm actually seeing the person in front of me. I'm interacting very live with them as if I'm actually in the room with them. And similarly, I noticed the same thing when Hangouts first came out, that when I was talking on the phone, my friends and I would kind of also tamper off or not pay attention. But when I started hanging out with people, I actually started noticing that my level of engagement has gone up considerably. So it's actually a really cool application of Hangouts where actually you can have a much better social engagement with people and with your friends and family. And of course, mobile, because there's nothing more social now than your actual mobile phone. And being a software engineer on mobile, I truly believe that. You have everything on there. You have your contacts, you have your location. It's with you at every single time. So when Google Plus first came out, we made sure that it has a very good mobile application. It has a lot of very cool features, like you can see a nearby stream, where you can see people who are around you, what they're talking about. We have also the Messenger application, which I actually personally work on, where it's like a BBM-like messaging application that is cross-platform, including SMS, so you can talk with people from different, with different phones on the go. And finally, the most important key concept of Google Plus is you. Because at Google, the most important thing for us is focusing on the user. What is the most important for the user is what's most important for us. Oops, there's some static. So when we came up with Google Plus, we wanted to concentrate on making it applicable for you. How can Google become a better social network by taking into consideration your social network, your social graph? Because what you know and who you know impacts a lot of our services. So for example, if I watch a YouTube video that I really like, and then Anna right here is interested in that, would be possibly interested in that video. So with that level of awareness within Google, to know who your social graph will help us better serve you as a consumer. So let's talk now about the Google Plus platform. There are 3 components of the Google Plus platform. The first one is the plugin, which is most used with the Google Plus One button. Anybody know what the Google Plus One button is? No? Okay, yeah, some people. Cool. So the Plus One button allows you to annotate web pages online to be able to indicate that this page is something I like. And it has a very good social application. So for example, let's say I'm searching for a camera to buy. There's a lot of great cameras online. Most people research the cameras online, read reviews, look for with the pros and cons of different cameras. But at the same time, you want to be able to know what your friends and family think of the cameras that you have. So if Rania right here decided to actually buy a camera and she has Plus One, a camera that she really likes, then that means a lot to me being friends with Rania, because I can see while researching for cameras that Rania really likes the Canon MD5, for example. And that's what the Plus One button allows you to do. It allows you to actually access those social annotations for those web pages. And it's available in websites. So you can, if you go to a certain website for a review site, or within the Google Plus search, Google search, excuse me. The second component of the API is the public data API, which we'll go into detail very shortly. But the idea here is basically accessing all the people, the comments, the activities within the Google Plus stream, so you can build cool applications. A couple of cool applications that people build with the Google Plus APIs that are currently out there. There's a site called Google Plus Timing. And the idea behind that website is I'm sending posts out throughout the day, throughout the week, but the site actually goes and figures out when is the most optimal time for me to post so that I get most engagement from people, getting most comments, reshares, plus ones, and that is also built, that's basically built on top of the API. There's another cool application which tells you if I have a post and that post has been reshared multiple times, it aggregates and follows those reshares and shows you all the comments on those reshares. So if you have a very popular post, then you can actually see where all the comments related to that post, so you can get better informed about that post in general. And finally, the third component of the Google Plus platform is the Hangouts API. So as I mentioned, the Hangouts is a 10-person video conference, and there are already a lot of applications on top of it, but we wanted to allow you guys to be able to build cool applications on top of these Hangouts APIs. So for example, one thing that might be relevant, I love Tarnib, and I think a lot of people in this area also love the same thing. So a cool application would be an app within the Hangout that you can actually play Tarnib while hanging out with other people. So if your brother is in Saudi Arabia, your sister is in the US, you can actually play Tarnib with all of those people while hanging out with them and make it seem like as if you're all staying locally with them. So all those three components make up the Google Plus platform. And we'll start with the public data API. So we'll go over the available endpoints, and then we talk a little bit of Oauth flow, and then we'll try a little bit to show you how you can easily access it. So the Google Plus API, public data API, is a RESTful API, which means it uses all the HTTP verbs like get, post, all those verbs. And it is built on a specification called Activity Stream, which is a cross-social network concept that tells you a lot about who the person who made the post, what the action was, what are the different other components of that. And it has a lot of client libraries for all the languages that you see up there. So whatever your application is, you can take advantage of those API to build your own application. And finally, it uses Oauth 2, which is an authentication mechanism. So if you want to build an application on behalf of a certain user, that you can actually be able to log in as them and perform actions, query actions on behalf of that user. There are 3 levels of APIs that you can have already. You have people, activities, and within activities, comments. So if for a certain person, I can actually get all the information about a certain user, like their name, their location, their image URL, all the other stuff. We'll show you an example in a second. You can also search for people. So I can search for people, all the people named Basel, and return the results of a bunch of people within that. But I can also list by activity. So if you have an activity that has a bunch of commenters, or an activity that has a bunch of people that is ACLed to, that there are people who are allowed to see the post, you can get the list of those people and perform more actions with them. And then also you can get the activities. So basically within a certain person profile, you can see all the activities of that user by doing a list query. But you can also get a specific activity if you have the activity ID. And I'll show you where you get that in a second. And you can also search. So I can kind of go and find all the ArabNet posts within Google Plus by calling the search API. And finally, you can get the comments for a specific post. You can list them, and you can get a specific one as well. So this is the format of getting a certain user. So you basically go to googleapi.com/plus, and then v1/people, and then you specify the user ID. And the user ID is actually in the parameter of every profile that you access from the Google Plus page. And the data that is returned is the stuff that you actually see in the About Me section. So you get like occupation, employment, places you lived, name, gender, image, and the output looks something like this. You get to see basically the ID, gender, all that information is available for you, and you can basically, whatever you need to use that data for, you can use. And as I said, if you authenticate as that user, instead of specifying the user ID, you can just specify the word me, and that would get you the person who is logged in at the moment. So let's try one. Let's try actually getting more information about a certain user. So over here you see my profile, and I have like a bunch of comments, and this is the About Me section of the profile. And if you see up here, you see plus.google.com, and you see a big digit right here. This is the actual user ID of any user that you access. So if you actually go and copy that number, and within the developers page, you can go to developers.google.com/plus. You get all the detailed information about the APIs that we're talking about today. And you can actually try it. You can actually go down to the bottom, and it shows you a little form that you can specify to try to get the API. And the return value is obviously a JSON that you can play with. So let's specify the user ID first, for my user ID. And if we click execute, then it returns to me, it shows you the request that was sent. It's a GET request with, as I said, plus/v1/people, and then the user ID. And obviously, you want to specify your API key when you actually are developing an application. And this is what the response is. You basically get the ID, the gender, the URL, and a lot of very useful information that you can use to be able to build your application on top of. But you can also, if you see here, you see an authorize using Oauth 2. So if I turn that on, it shows me a little authorized page that would basically be shown to your user. It didn't pop up right now. But once you do that, I can actually go and instead of saying certain user, I can just type me, and we'll show you the information about the user who is currently logged in. And if you click execute, then you get basically, you see now it shows me instead of showing the user ID. And it shows you the same information that I did with actually specifying the user ID. So this is something that you can kind of play around with. It's a very nice website that you can play around with, get a little more familiar with the API before building your application. So that was the people get. You can also get basically a list of activities by an activity ID, very similarly by showing plus/v1/activities, and you specify the activity ID. And the activity ID is also in the URL. And again, you can get the activity ID by doing a list of activities on a certain user and get all the IDs for those activities. And then this is basically the list of results that is shown. Shows you when it was published, when it was updated, who the actor is. So this is the activity stream specification that I was mentioning, which shows you the actor with the ID, display name, and the verb right here, which is a type of post, as opposed to a comment or any other thing. And you can also get the comments for a specific post by following the activity ID/comment section, which returns you all the list of comments on a specific activity. And you can get you basically get a list of those comments, and you can access each one of those comments. You can also query users, and the way you do that is by going to the people section, and you specify the query in the parameter, and it's just a plain string query that returns you then the list of people. So over here I list for Basel, and it returns you all the people whose name has the name Basel in it. And you can also query activities by following the activities section and specifying the string of what query you want to do. So over here I'm searching for football, and I get a bunch of really cool articles about football. So to review, you can access people by getting them, searching them, or listing by activity. You can get a list of activity for a specific user. You can get a specific activity given the activity ID, and you can search for activities using a query. And finally, you can get comments by listing comments in an activity, and you can get a specific comment. And I highly encourage you to go to that website to try out these public APIs. So now I want to talk about what I'm really excited about, which is Hangout Apps. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there, and a lot of stuff that is being built as we speak. And I highly encourage you to go play with it, because that's kind of going to be a lot of really cool stuff with a lot of really cool applications. So I'm going to talk a little bit how to build apps, and then the key concept of the APIs, and then we can open up to Q&A. So currently, there's a lot of apps that are available out there for the Hangouts. As I said, you can watch YouTube clips together. That's already an application that's already available when you hang out with somebody. But there's also some really other cool productivity applications. So I can share a doc with a bunch of users and work collaboratively with them while hanging out with them. We could do a sketch. You can read a book together. And there's a lot of other applications that are already available by default with any Hangouts. But you can also build your own. You don't have to rely on the current apps that are available. And we wanted to provide those APIs so we can let you be creative and find out what you can build on top of. So let's look at some of what's inside the Hangout apps. So it's a JavaScript-based, web-based software that is built using an HTML. And it uses an XML syntax to define your actual app. But once you define your app using XML, you can write everything else in HTML, and like plain HTML and JavaScript. And there are a bunch of APIs, JavaScript APIs, that we provide to you to be able to access more information about the people within the Hangout and the Hangout itself. And here's the main rule, is whatever you can do within an iframe is something that you could do within a Hangout app. So this is the app XML specification. You can notice there are three main components. There's the XML header that basically defines the XML and the module. And then this basically defines the preferences for the module. And it's really important that you specify the RPC and the views, but you also specify your application name with the title so you can actually see it when doing the app. And then finally, you basically include the script, the Hangout script, JavaScript, so you can get the access to the API. And then you basically write your application as if you're writing any HTML page. So let's talk about some of the key concepts within the Hangout apps. There's the Hangout, as I said, you can include the Hangouts JavaScript, which gives you access to a lot of really cool features, including the participants who basically are within the app. You get also to the Hangout server stores for you a shared state that you can distribute across different Hangout participants. So you'll be able to, for example, in the game of Tarnib, you can basically show the hand that is currently being played. There's the ace of spades and the three of hearts or whatever it is, and it will show you basically that shared data that is distributed among everybody within the app. You can also view and control the audio video. So you can set the mic level. You can, put the person, you can put whoever in the middle that you want. You can change that. You can also change the layout. For example, you can add a chat window, or you can remove the chat window. And you can also control the Hangout itself. So the way the shared state works is if a certain participant changes the state, we upload that to the Hangout server. And then the Hangout server goes ahead and distributes it to everybody, including the original participant. And that way allows you to sync your state across all the participants. And one thing I might have mentioned is that it's a JSON string object. So if you have a binary data, then you might want to have to stringify it before you actually distribute it among different participants. And the Hangout.js gives you a lot of APIs. You can get the participant ID, which is actually unique for the Hangout. You can also get the participant by ID, which is basically shows you more information about the participant, including the Google Plus public data API person. And you can also, if the person changed, if people join or leave the Hangout, you can get a callback that will call you when that happens, so you can update your state whatever you need to. And the participant data structure, as I said, has the ID, which is unique to the Hangout, so it doesn't share. It's not shared among different Hangouts. If you need to basically index it within your server, you could do that. And it basically has a Boolean shows you that has the app installed. And it shows you the person ID from the URL that I mentioned, the ID, the Google Plus ID, display name, image URL, all the other information. And it also shows you the avatar for that user. You can also, this is how you basically get the state, is basically by calling API Hangout Data Get State. And you can also submit deltas, what you basically updates that you have and the removes that you have within that. And basically the state is a key value map pair that you specify, and it basically the server keeps it on track for you. And you have a callback. You can add a callback that will return to you, what is called whenever the state changes. The participants on the other Hangouts can update their own internal states. You can also change the audio video. You can see if a user has a camera. You can check the audio level of a certain user. But you can also set the avatar for that user. You can basically change the way that user looks. You can basically put stuff on top of the user, like putting hats or mustaches or any of that. And you can also change the layout. So you can set the chat pane to be visible or not. The chat is basically a Google Talk chat pane where users can chat. If you want it for your application, you can have it. You can set whoever is highlighted within the Hangout by specifying the Hangout ID, and you can clear the highlight that is there. And you can also display a notice on top, which is like a little yellow message that shows on top to basically display any notice that you want. And finally, you can get some Hangout metadata, like is the app visible for that user or not? The user could have chosen to not show the app. Or you can get the locale. So if you have a multi-lingual Hangout, you can basically set the strings based on the locale. And there's a get participants, which shows you everybody within the Hangout. But you can also get enabled participants, which are basically the users who have installed your app in the Hangout, so you can customize the app for them. And you can also get the displayed participant, which is the user that is shown in the middle. And you can also hide the app when you're done with basically, when the user is done with the app. And as I said, these APIs are there to unleash your creativity, because as Google, we have a lot of really cool applications on top of the Hangouts, but we want to see what you come up with. And I highly recommend that you go to this website, the developers.google.com/plus page, and try the APIs within the console. One thing I forgot to mention is currently the Hangout apps you can only try them out within the developer console. So when you install the developer console, you can try out the Hangout APIs, and you can't publish the app yet, but hopefully we will find a way soon to be able to distribute your app once it actually becomes public. And you can basically download some starter projects and libraries that you can, like a client that I mentioned earlier, and try the Hangout. It's really cool. It's one of the really great concept of Google+, and it's one of the things that gets me really excited. And that's it. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, I can answer them, whether for Google+ API or the Maps API.
How would you use the Hangouts API from a mobile app? You showed a web application. Is it possible to use it from a mobile application?
Currently, there is no ability to do an app within the Hangout from within the mobile. Although it is available, Hangouts within mobile are available, but currently there's no way to actually build apps on top of mobile. Well, it's a good feedback. I'll pass that along, see if there's a way.
It's probably not practical, though, anyway, to have too many videos on a mobile.
Maybe to have a Hangout?
To have a Hangout on a mobile device.
Well, actually, we have it already available. If you download the Google+ app on your mobile, and you can access that app with a Hangout that is already going on, or you can start a Hangout from within Messenger. So you can start a conversation with a bunch of people and click Hangout, and it'll basically distribute a message to all those users saying, so-and-so is in the Hangout, and allows other people to actually join in, Obviously, it might be a battery drain, so you want to be hanging out the whole time, but it is available for you if you want to use it.
Can I have another one?
Absolutely, yeah.
If as a developer, I want to reach a large audience, and obviously there is Google+, and there are other social networks. why would I choose one? Why would I use Google Plus over another social network?
Well, as a developer, you want to be able to reach out as many people as possible, right? You want to be able to kind of get your app used as many people as possible. If your audience is available on Google Plus, that's something that is very valuable for you, and it's something that you can possibly monetize on and get more usage of your application. But you know, you can also you want to also get on other social networks. I don't want to be able to corner you onto Google Plus per se, but it's, you know, there are certain things like the Hangout APIs are not possibly available on other social networks that you can kind of build really cool applications on top of. Any other questions? That is true. So currently, you can basically try out the app. We can specify a number of people within your team, within the developer console. So let's say me and Rania and Anna could basically be working the Hangout and trying it out and working the app. And so basically, we want to be able to allow you, and this set of APIs are very recent, so we want to allow you to be able to kind of try them out, build application. So when we finally launch, show you ability to launch those applications, you have your app ready for it to be used by your users. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much for attending. And if you need any more questions, me and Anna will stick around for a bit. Thank you for attending.